Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake so the gas didn't kill them, since it was toxic in high concentrations. This was before closed-circuit cameras, so they had only microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with books, cots to sleep on but no bedding, running water and toilet, and enough dried food to last all 5 for over a month. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of the state during World War II. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained, having been promised, falsely, that they would be freed if they submitted to the test and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past, and the general tone of their conversations took on a darker aspect after the 4-day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about the circumstances and events that lead them to where they were and started to demonstrate severe paranoia. They stopped talking to each other and began alternately whispering to the microphones and one-way mirror portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects, in captivity with them. At first, the researchers suspected this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber, repeatedly yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. He continued attempting to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this behavior is how the other captives reacted to it, or rather didn't react to it. They continued whispering to the microphones until the second of the captives started to scream. The 2 non-screaming captives took the books apart, smeared page after page with their own feces, and pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped. So did the whispering to the microphones. After 3 more days passed, the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure they were working, since they thought it impossible that no sound could be coming with 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people would consume at a very heavy level of strenuous exercise. On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers did something they said they would not do to get a reaction from the captives. They used the intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provoke any response from the captives they were afraid were either dead or vegetables. They announced, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphone. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." To their surprise, they heard a single phrase and a calm voice response, "We no longer want to be freed." Debate broke out among the researchers and the military forces funding the research. Unable to provoke any more response using the intercom, it was finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air, and immediately voices from the microphones began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for the life of loved ones, to turn the gas back on. The chamber was opened and soldiers sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although no one could rightly call the state that any of them in life. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subjects' thighs and chests stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking the drain and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much of the water on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth as the researchers initially thought. Closer examination of the position and angles of the wounds indicated that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the ribcage of all 4 test subjects had been removed. While the heart, lungs, and diaphragm remained in place, the skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through the ribcage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had just been taken out and lay on the floor, fanning out around the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tract of all four could be seen to be working, digesting food. It quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh that they had ripped off and eaten over the course of days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but still many refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. They continued to scream to be left in the chamber and alternately begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on, lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out, another was gravely injured by having his testicles ripped off and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. Another 5 of the soldiers lost their lives if you count ones that committed suicide in the weeks following the incident. In the struggle, one of the 4 living subjects had his spleen ruptured and he bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of a morphine derivative and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arm of one doctor. When heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out to the point there was more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach and just repeating the word more over and over, weaker and weaker, until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility, the 2 with intact vocal cords continuously begging for the gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room that the facility had. In the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back within his body, it was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative they had given him to prepare him for the surgery. He fought furiously against his restraints when the anesthetic gas was brought out to put him under. He managed to tear most of the way through a 0.4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even though the weight of a 200-pound soldier was holding that wrist as well. It took only a little more anesthetic than normal to put him under, and the instant his eyelids fluttered and closed, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had tripled the normal level of oxygen. His muscles that were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in his struggle to not be subdued. Most of them were from the force his own muscles had exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming. His vocal cords destroyed, he was unable to beg or object to surgery, and he only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes when someone suggested, reluctantly, they try the surgery without anesthetic, and did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure of replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon presiding stated repeatedly that it should be medically possible for the patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something of drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad fetched so the patient could write his message. It was simple: keep cutting. The other 2 test subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthetic as well, although they had to be injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation. The surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subjects could only follow the attending researchers with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their system in an abnormally short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the stimulant gas. The researchers tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response was given: I must remain awake. All 3 subjects' restraints were reinforced, and they were placed back into the chamber awaiting determination as to what should be done with them. The researchers, facing the wrath of their military benefactors for having failed the stated goals of their project, considered euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer, a former KGB agent, instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected, but were overruled. In preparation for being sealed in the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all three stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back on the gas. It was obvious that at this point all three were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. One of the subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bonds with all his might, first left, then right, then left again for something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly. Having been the first to be wired for EEG, most of the researchers were monitoring his brain waves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatlined inexplicably. It looked as if he were repeatedly suffering from brain death before returning to normal. As they focused on paper scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw his eyes slip shut at the same moment his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to that of a deep sleep, then flatlined for the last time as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed, and now his brainwaves showed the same flat lines as one who had just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside, as well as 3 researchers. One of the named 3 immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. He pointed his gun at the remaining subject, still restrained to a bed, as the remaining members of the medical and research team fled the room. "I won't be locked in here with these things." "Not with you," he screamed at the man strapped to the table. "What are you?" he demanded. "I must know." The subject smiled. "Have you forgotten so easily?" The subject asked. "We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." The researcher paused, then aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out, "So, nearly free." "I work at NASA. We made alien contact yesterday. I can't tell you who I am, and I can't tell you the name of the program, but what I can tell you is that if what they say is true, we're in trouble. Now, we didn't make contact in the way you would think we would. We didn't beam out an episode of The Office towards Andromeda and hear back from alien critics. And we definitely didn't meet them face to face. We found another way to communicate. Something apparently ancient humans have figured out as well. There are countless dilapidated ancient structures around the world, and some of them, not all, but some, were communication arrays. At least a handful on each continent. I'm sure you'll be able to think of a few after I describe what we did. We've been working on this technology for a while. There has been a long-standing theory that sound has a much larger part in the universe than just being random vibrations. That the universe is simply a bunch of vibrations and sound, and if you find a way to manipulate those vibrations properly, you could do things that seem impossible. We proved that yesterday. By creating an extremely precise echo chamber and playing certain frequencies into it at precisely the right volumes and the exact right timings, we broke some sort of barrier. Nothing really happened, visually at least. We had run countless tests like these with tiny, minute differences, and this one seemed pretty mundane. There was a slight unnatural thrumming. The glass between us and the echo chamber shook in regular intervals as if we were playing a bass-heavy song too loudly. The first thing that tipped us off that something was happening was that once we turned the speakers off, the thrumming didn't stop. My 3 coworkers and I could all feel this thrumming in our chests still, kind of like being next to a very loud drum. We talked for a moment before we all fell silent. There was something else now. It wasn't a voice. It was some sort of intelligent vibration. I can't explain it. It was like a voice was inside my chest, but it wasn't speaking. I could just feel what it was saying. My cohorts and I debated on the exact wording afterwards, but we all agreed on the overall messages each time. Like I said, they weren't really talking, so I'll do my best to phrase it in ways that get across what they said, in the way they said it. "You guys are back," is what I felt in my chest. My colleagues and I stared at each other in utter confusion. One of them spoke up. "Hello?" he asked hesitantly. There was a silence for a moment before the thrumming spoke back. "I think I have it set right now. Say that again." "Hello?" I repeated back to it in place of the other scientist. "Yep, there it is," he said quickly. "You guys figured it out again." "That's crazy," it exclaimed. This wasn't what I was thinking the first human/alien conversation was going to go. I wasn't even sure that this was first contact at this point, though. "Who is this? What is this?" I asked loudly into the open air of our control room. "I'm not sure if I'm allowed to give you details like who we are, but what this is the ultimate form of communication in our universe. Your ancestors figured it out briefly too. With some quick deduction on how I was wording things, I think each of us figured out what we were talking to was alien in origin around the same time." "Where are you from?" I asked. "You have to be close." Hell, with the way we were talking back and forth, they had to be really close. It takes communications to Mars a few minutes to get there, just because that is as fast as light is. If we were talking this quickly back and forth, they basically had to be on Earth. "I guess you wouldn't know. We didn't tell your ancestors. We didn't think they'd get it. Let me do some math really quick." It was about a minute before it spoke again. "What you see as your observable universe, that's not the whole universe. Not even close. Multiply that by about 15, and that's about how far we're away. And there's a lot past that." We all looked at each other. It was speaking utter bullshit to us now. That was impossible. We'd never be able to communicate, ever. Physically impossible. We explained that to the chest voice, and we were met by an equal level of confusion. "Why are you still using light as a yardstick?" it asked incredulously. Suddenly, its voice grew slightly dire. "You're still not advanced enough. You don't even know." "Know what?" one of my friends asked. "You are dead center in the life abyss. There is no life on any planet around you for more than 10 of your observable universes around you in any direction. It's a universal mystery how you're even alive." It spoke grimly. Never in my life had I felt smaller, more insignificant, and more alone. It continued. "And there is a reason for that." An earnest and tangible feeling of dread took over the control room. "There is a reason for that." It reverberated through my entire body as the vibration spoke. But then, silence. No one in the control room spoke a word. We barely even looked at each other. The silence continued for over a minute that felt like a day. "What's the reason?" Dave, the senior scientist on hand, finally spoke. He had chosen a serious and somber tone in an endless list of choices on how to react. "If you value your lives, if you value the lives of every living thing on your planet, never use this form of communication ever again." It shook into our chests. That one felt less welcoming. It felt like a dire warning. And just like that, we felt the tingling, shaking force leave our chests. It just simply faded away, like how when a chord of a guitar is plucked. We looked now to one another. What was the play? Forge on bravely into the void in the name of science and play the frequencies again? Or take an alien warning and stop? We didn't get to make that decision. Our program is monitored closely by the US military. A voice came I didn't recognize over the intercom. "Don't touch anything, folks. We're gonna come in and take a look at a few things." Dave took charge. We were all clearly panicked at what we had experienced, but he seemed to have the most level head. "All we can do is tell the truth," he reasoned, just as the door to the control room was opened. The next hour or so was a blur. I was first questioned by my boss as to what he just watched over his monitor. What he saw was a handful of his employees standing in a circle and periodically yelling nonsense at no one in particular. I took Dave's advice to heart and told him as clearly as I could what happened. I think I was the first he talked to. He wasn't buying anything I said. Slowly, I was joined by the rest of the team, one by one, and they recounted pretty much exactly what I had said. So now what they knew was that we had all started a test, then stood around in a circle, and then all came up with the same story. It started to get more believable. We were each rushed to individual physical exams, and then into a more in-depth interview with someone from the military. The exams seemed to go well. I never heard back from them. The interview seemed to be going good as well. I had basically recounted what I said to my boss word for word, just this time on tape and in front of some guy in an army uniform. Just when things seemed to be wrapping up, the door to our small interviewing office opened behind me. "Sir, we need you down the hall immediately." A woman in army fatigues spoke quickly before rushing back down the hallway. I looked back to the man interviewing me, but he was already halfway out the door before I could say anything. I was sitting there for a few minutes. I had time to think. Was I crazy if I believed whatever the thing in my chest was telling me? Everything it said sounded impossible, but nothing of it felt like a like. Even though I could only feel what it was saying, I could feel its excitement when we first made contact. I could feel the desperation in it as it told us to never contact it again. What was important though, nothing felt like a lie. I noticed my interviewer had been taking notes as we spoke. Now that I had been left alone for a few minutes, I thought, what was the harm in taking a peek? I slowly reached over the table and flipped his papers over. They read, "Unknown frequency report, subject, my name, significant physical changes to the subject since his last physical 6 months ago according to the base physician after exposure to the frequencies in this report. No cosmetic changes or complaints of pain or unease, describes vibrations in chest. Describes hearing voices after being exposed to the frequencies. No history of mental illness. Frequencies that cause mental illness? Breaks with reality? Hallucinations?" That's as far as he got before he was interrupted. I slid the papers back across the table and sat back in my chair. All of us had described the same thing, but they were thinking we were all just crazy? It warned us, and the more I thought about it, I wanted to take that warning to heart. I sat up starkly. She said down the hall. The control room was down the hall. With how they rushed us out of there, we didn't even have a chance to turn the machinery off. We didn't even turn a single dial on our stun states. All they had to do was press a button, and the vibrations would play again. Shit. I exploded out of my seat, through the door, and down the hall. I ripped the door of the control room open, to all of the military officers, and a few more scientists standing there in disbelief. I hadn't even heard the vibrations again. But I could hear the voice on the other side, and now, so could they. "I just told you to never use this again." It thundered in my chest. A few of the older men in the room grabbed at their chests in pain. "1 second, I need to check something." It spoke again angrily. "You could have gotten away with just using it the once. Twice was too much." His sentence ended in a twinge of fear. "He heard you. He's listening right now. And he's coming." The James Webb Telescope discovered something terrifying in deep space. I work for NASA as an astronomer, and there are certain things we keep hidden from the public. No, the Earth isn't flat, and aliens don't control the government. Fuck, I wish those were the case, as the truth is much, much worse. In 1993, the Hubble Space Telescope saw a star disappear. It didn't go supernova, or die naturally, it simply went dark over the span of a few minutes. This star was already too faint to see with the naked eye, and ground-based telescopes had trouble picking it out from among the surrounding stars, so the event wasn't widely known to the public. At the time, we thought the most likely explanation was that a cloud of interstellar dust had drifted between Earth and the star, occluding it from view. It was noted and mostly forgotten about. In 2007, 2 more stars vanished. Due to the circumstances of this event, this was much more concerning. The 2 stars in question were part of a binary system, orbiting each other at a fairly close distance. If a cloud of interstellar dust was the culprit again, they would have both seemed to disappear simultaneously or very close to it. Instead, both stars faded individually over a period of minutes, separated by a span of about 8 hours. This binary system was also about 15 light-years closer to Earth than the star that had previously disappeared in 1993.